What would a Christmas movie be without a touch of magic? And that Christmas magic is all the more meaningful when it touches the lives of people in need of a miracle. Ordinary, everyday people like you and me. Hi, I'm Basha, and in this 4-part series, we're going to look at magical realism in Christmas movies, starting off with some heartwarming movies where angels come to earth in answer to a prayer. But before we get started, what do I mean by magical realism? Simply put, magical realism is a style of storytelling that blurs the lines between reality and fantasy. The stories take place in a realistic setting, but at some point, something magical happens. And the magic usually solves a problem or addresses an emotional or psychological issue. In this video, that magical element is the appearance of an angel in the life of a troubled person. Often someone troubled by a crisis of faith or misplaced priorities, and usually, but not always, a man of the cloth. The angel's mission of restoring faith can include healing trauma or helping the person to come to grips with what's really important to them. And the visit usually leaves the person with a renewed sense of purpose in life and always a new appreciation for the value of family and relationships. Be sure to keep watching to the end because I've saved the best for last. And if you haven't already seen these movies, be forewarned that there will be spoilers. Now, let's get started with 1947's The Bishop's Wife, starring Cary Grant, Loretta Young, and David Niven. The angel Dudley, funny name for an angel, the angel Dudley comes to earth in answer to the bishop's prayer.
Oh God, please help me.
Good evening.
What can I do for you?
That isn't the question. What can I do for you? I was instructed to come here in answer to your prayer.
Henry thinks he was praying for help with getting his new cathedral built without having to bend to the whims of his wealthy donor, Mrs. Hamilton. But he doesn't realize yet that he needs help with so much more than that. First and foremost, he doesn't even realize that his marriage is falling apart because he's been neglecting his wife, Julia.
Oh, if only we could spend Christmas back here where we were so happy with you and all of our old friends.
No.
And at the same time that Henry was praying for help, Julia was saying a little prayer of her own.
I'm going to try to help Henry to rest and get some relaxation.
That's what I've been praying for.
But Henry's a little slow in the uptake, and he keeps neglecting Julia for his other duties, even breaking his promise to spend the day with her.
And Henry and I are going out together.
I'm terribly sorry, but I find I have some appointments.
Don't you remember, Henry? You promised. You needn't try to explain, Henry. This is the way it is, and this is the way it will always be.
Dudley starts out his work by gently prodding Henry to take stock of his priorities.
Yes, we should make haste. There's no time to lose.
Because the cathedral must be built?
Well, obviously that's the most important thing.
Or because Julia must be happy? You know, Henry, it's going to be difficult for me to help you until I'm sure what it is you really want.
But Henry is still much more focused on his cathedral, so Dudley steps in and starts getting to know Julia.
Did you and Henry come here often?
Yes. As a matter of fact, this is where we became engaged to be married.
Then I can understand why you love it.
And every time Henry neglects Julia, Dudley steps in. In fact, Dudley has a plan. He and Julia start becoming very chummy. But just when you think you know where this is going,
Dudley, this has been the most wonderful evening I've had in years.
it becomes clear that Dudley is purposely making Henry jealous so that he'll appreciate Julia instead of taking her for granted.
Where's Dudley? Oh, you got a preacher with you. Oh, I know. There's going to be a wedding ceremony. You and Dudley.
Sylvester, this is my husband, Bishop Brown.
And it works.
There's one thing I know about this. Julia is absolutely blameless.
Of course she is. Well, if you'd sent me to represent you with Mrs. Hamilton, I would have gone. You didn't, so I represented you with your wife.
In fact, Henry even sends Dudley away in his fit of jealousy.
I want you to get out of my house and out of my life and away from Julia. I want you to go.
Julia doesn't.
Get out!
But Dudley sticks around because his job isn't finished yet. And all the while, Henry's jealousy is mounting until it finally comes to a head.
Now, why do you want to fight me, Henry?
Because you're a thief. Trying to steal my wife, my child, my all, the love that belongs to me.
I think Henry is finally starting to reevaluate his priorities. But does he realize what he's up against?
You realize, Henry, that as an angel, I could quite possibly destroy you with a bolt of lightning.
I don't care. Julia means more to me than my life.
So, by showing Henry that he could risk losing Julia, he finally gets him to appreciate her and realize how important she is to him. Up until now, he seems to have considered his marriage to be a distraction from the more important business of getting funding for his cathedral. And all this time, Dudley has been hard at work trying to get Henry to reevaluate his professional priorities as well as his personal priorities, but it's an uphill battle. Henry goes to meet with Mrs. Hamilton and caves into her demands so that he can get his cathedral built when he knows in his heart that what he's doing is not right.
You've come to apologize, I trust.
Exactly. Upon mature consideration, my objections seem petty indeed compared with the generosity of your gesture.
What hurt me most was to think that my instinct had betrayed me in recommending you for the position you now hold. You no longer feel the effect will be that the whole cathedral was built in my husband's honor.
That was the phrase used in the heat of dispute. What really matters is that the cathedral be built.
In fact, Dudley had called him on this earlier.
Mrs. Hamilton is giving the money for the cathedral.
Well, that was a foregone conclusion, if you were willing to make a slight sacrifice of your principles.
But he still doesn't seem to be getting through to Henry.
You came here so that I could have a cathedral. Well, I've got a cathedral, and now I want you to go.
And his pleas to Henry's conscience fall on deaf ears.
So many people need shelter. That big roof could make so many little roofs.
But we're dealing with a materialistic, selfish woman. She wouldn't listen to talk like that.
So now that Henry's about to cave into Mrs. Hamilton, Dudley exerts a little pressure from a distance.
And I'm so glad we've settled our differences.
Is there anything the matter?
Well, it doesn't seem quite right, does it?
Up until now, most of Dudley's magic has been the kind that any of us could have worked if we set our mind to it, but that was a neat little trick. Unfortunately, his delay tactics don't have the desired effect, so he runs interference with Mrs. Hamilton herself, getting her to have a change of heart by reminding her of her own heartache and the misplaced priorities of her youth.
Alan Carteret was the only man I ever loved. We were engaged to be married, and I got frightened. He had nothing, and I was afraid of poverty.
And she does have a change of heart.
You know, my dear, meeting Dudley has been the greatest spiritual experience of my life. Henry, I've changed my mind about the cathedral. I'm going to give my money to those who need it, to the poor and the homeless.
Now the only loose end he has left to tie up is to get both Henry and Julia to forget he even existed, which could be a little tricky because Julia seems to have grown quite attached to him. So he needs to make her want him to leave.
Julia,
Yes?
I think my work here is almost finished. I'll have to be moving along. I don't want to leave.
Why?
There are few people who know the secret of making a heaven here on earth. You are one of those rare people.
And of course it works like a charm.
I think you ought to go. You must go away and never come back.
But Henry still isn't completely happy with the outcome.
My prayer's not been answered. I was praying for a cathedral.
No, Henry. You were praying for guidance. That has been given to you.
Even so, once Dudley walks out of their lives and out of their minds, everything seems to fall into place.
Henry, what is it?
I don't know. I just have the most inexplicable feeling of happiness. Let's drink to us, to our happiness, and to what lies ahead.
More than anything else, I think this story leaves us with the impression that there are always angels among us, even though we may be unaware of their influence. So the next time you have an epiphany, or things seem to work out for the best in spite of your best efforts to sabotage yourself, consider this.
Angels come down and put ideas into people's heads, and then people feel very proud of themselves because they think it was all their own idea.
Of course, the most famous Christmas movie angel is the adorable, simple-minded Clarence, played by Henry Travers in the 1946 movie It's a Wonderful Life, directed by Frank Capra and starring James Stewart, Donna Reed, Lionel Barrymore, Thomas Mitchell, Beulah Bondi, and Gloria Graham, just to name a few. Clarence comes to Earth to help out George Bailey, a man who has lived his life by putting his own dreams on the back burner and sacrificing them to help others. Ever since he was a boy, he's had big dreams of becoming an engineer and traveling the world.
I'm going out exploring someday. You watch.
Oh, well, you know what I've always talked about. Build things, design new buildings, plan modern cities. I want to do something big and something important. I'm shaking the dust of this crummy little town off my feet, and I'm going to see the world.
But he puts off his own higher education and travel plans multiple times for the sake of others. First, in the wake of his father's death.
I want the board to know that George gave up his trip to Europe to help straighten things out here these past few months.
Hey, look, you gave up your boat trip. Now you don't want to miss college too, do you?
They've appointed George here as executive secretary to take his father's place.
I'm leaving. I'm leaving right now. I'm going to school. This is my last chance.
But George, they'll vote with Potter otherwise.
And 4 years later, when his brother Harry comes home from college and is expected to take over the family business.
What's a pretty girl like like you doing marrying this two-headed brother of mine?
Well, I'll tell you, it's purely mercenary. My father offered him a job.
George even gives up his honeymoon to protect the life savings of his clients during a run on the bank.
I got $2,000. Here's $2,000. This will tide us over to the bank reopen.
And somewhere along the way, he seems to have resigned himself to giving up on his dreams and living an ordinary life, raising a family and making do with the meager earnings from the building and loan. And not without a bit of resentment. But things come to a head when a large sum of money goes missing, just when the bank examiner shows up.
8,000. Well, aren't you going to make a deposit? Oh, sure I am. Well, then it's usually customary to bring the money with you.
With the help of George's arch nemesis, the villainous Mr. Potter.
Not every heel was in Germany and Japan. Bailey. Bring me back there.
And when George goes crawling to Potter for a loan to help him out of the mess he's in, Potter lets him know just what his life is worth, in monetary terms.
You're worth more dead than alive.
So in a moment of desperation, George decides to cash it in. And this is where Clarence comes in. He's come to Earth because a lot of people have been praying for George.
Help him, dear Father. Joseph, Jesus, and Mary, help my friend, Mr. Bailey.
Help my son George tonight. Please, God, something's the matter with Daddy. Please bring Daddy back.
His mission is to save George from throwing away his life, so he draws upon everything he's learned about George, from his selflessness to his everyday heroism, starting at a very young age.
Infected his left ear.
And that's the memory that gives him inspiration for a way to save George from the immediate danger that he poses to himself.
I jumped in the river to save you.
But George is still soured on life.
I suppose it'd been better if I'd never been born at all.
What'd you say?
I said I wish I'd never been born.
And that gives Clarence another idea.
You've got your wish. You've never been born.
From there, we follow George through a nightmarish tour of the town of Bedford Falls, as it would be if George had never been born.
That rumhead spent 20 years in jail for poisoning a kid. If you know him, you must be a jailbird yourself.
You see, George, you were not there to stop Gower from putting that poison into the capsule.
What do you mean?
Your brother, Harry Bailey, broke through the ice and was drowned at the age of 9. Harry wasn't there to save him because you weren't there to save Harry. You see, George, you really had a wonderful life. Strange, isn't it? Each man's life touches so many other lives. And when he isn't around, he leaves an awful hole, doesn't he?
So in his own simple way, Clarence teaches George that life has value, not based on how much you've accomplished or if you've achieved your goals, or even based on how much money you have. He comes to appreciate his own contributions to the people of Bedford Falls and gains a renewed sense of appreciation for friends and family, and even for life's struggles. I think what inspires me most about this story is the idea that we seldom know how our lives impact the lives of others around us, for better or for worse. Anyway, let's get back to the movies. In our next movie, the angel is much less personal, or more personal depending on how you look at it. The Christmas Candle from 2013 is set in the English countryside in the late 1800s and stars Hans Matheson as the Reverend David Richmond, who has lost his faith because of a personal tragedy. And so he leaves the ministry and begins administering to the needy in the only way he knows how, through good works.
This is my pulpit now. Soup, soap, and salvation.
But he's persuaded to return to the pulpit and is assigned to a new parish where he learns that his parishioners believe that a Christmas miracle is visited upon their village once every 25 years.
Every 25 years, the angel visits the Haddington Chancellery, and every time a prayer is answered.
And it just so happens that the year that Reverend David comes to the parish is the year that a miracle is expected to take place. But he dismisses the legend as superstition.
Had I known that the people of this town were expecting to hear such fairy tales from the pulpit, I never would have come. But I see no reason to promote superstitions or raise false hopes.
His faith in miracles has been replaced by his faith in good works, and so he gets the candle makers to show him the requests that have come in for miracles that year. And he sets about trying to solve people's problems on his own, putting his faith in his own good deeds.
Who here has put in a request for the candle? Well, surely not everyone can receive the Christmas candle. And yet we all have needs.
The people's requests for the candle, may I see them? You may have one candle to give, but I hope to give everyone a little light this Christmas.
And has he got his work cut out for him?
Poor boy would do anything for that candle. Hasn't been able to say a word since his parents died. Charlie, the Reverend has offered to give you Bible lessons.
Now, Charlie, we are going to loose that tongue of yours.
I understand you have requested the candle. I wondered if I might be of service.
The Reverend fixing our roof. We so desperately need it.
And he does sometimes get in over his head.
Well, go on. A silent request is no request at all.
I'm praying for a husband. By Easter.
But we, the viewers, get to see the Christmas angel come and bless the candle. Unfortunately, things don't quite go according to plan this year. So the candle makers do the only thing they can do.
We give them away. All of them. And have the entire village think they've got the actual Christmas candle. We tell them what this family has told them for generations to light it and pray.
Meanwhile, the Reverend seems determined to put the candle makers out of business.
Install 5 circuits. I want the light in this church to surpass the brightness of 1,000 candles.
I regret to inform you that St. Mark's no longer requires your candle.
But that's a standing order. It has been for 200 years.
Standing no more, I'm afraid.
And during his sermons, he encourages his parishioners to become the miracle they would wish for.
Does your neighbor need a miracle this Christmas? Well, why not be that miracle? Now let us go forth as joyful messengers, doing the work of God.
And this becomes the crowning glory of one of his sermons leading up to Christmas.
In my short time in Gladbury, I have seen many miracles. I have seen angels at work. I have seen them on the rooftops, at kitchen tables, and in this very sanctuary. In fact, I see these angels now. Every single one of you who has allowed the light of Christ to shine through your good works.
And then disaster strikes when he turns on the new electric lights, hoping to impress his flock with the miracle of modern technology.
But today marks the dawning of a new age in Gladbury.
Is he going to be all right?
He's dead.
And when he's called upon to deliver the last rites to a dying man, we see for the first time the extent to which he's lost his faith.
Dr. Clem's diagnosed father with consumption.
I'm sorry, but I can't give your father what he's asking for.
You're a minister. He's a dying man. You can't give him a simple prayer.
I don't believe in miracles.
And we find out why.
My wife and daughter died of consumption. I prayed. I even believed for a miracle. But God did nothing.
When the candle makers find the lost candle under a piece of furniture, they give it to the Reverend in good faith, explaining how the candle came to be lost. But he doesn't exactly appreciate the gesture, and in his Christmas Eve sermon, he tries to expose the tradition as a hoax and put an end to it.
Many of you have no doubt come to rejoice in the miracle of the Christmas candle. But regretfully, tonight you shall see this long-standing tradition come to an end. I would now like to ask the recipient of the Christmas candle to please stand.
He hopes that by exposing the candlemaker's deception, he can stop everyone from believing in miracles. Yet, as he continues his sermon, he seems to be talking to himself as much as to his flock.
Now more than ever, I see the urgent need to speak on the virtue of enduring faith.
A faith that endures disappointment and unanswered prayer.
But instead of erasing their faith in the miracle of the Christmas candle, his plan backfires in a delightful way.
I've got something to say. I can speak. I prayed. Every day I prayed. And then I woke up this morning and I could talk.
As many of you know, I was stuck on the bottle.
Like never before, I prayed.
And I found I was drinking less and less.
I asked for the candle, and it saved my cat.
I prayed for my father. Here he is.
Yet in the face of all this, the Reverend is still not convinced.
God help me in my unbelief.
Tragedy strikes again that very night.
The carriage overturned. We've got to hurry. She's about to have the baby.
And he discovers that desperation can be a thrust block for faith.
How will we ever find her?
Don't do us any good like this.
Why the Haddington candle?
Then he remembers that the Christmas candle doesn't work on its own, but in combination with a prayer.
Wait, please God, keep Ruth safe.
What's happening?
A miracle is happening. You're safe now.
And with this miracle, the Reverend's faith is restored and he's able to move beyond the trauma of losing his wife and daughter and get on with the business of living. He even gets married again. I am, however, reminded of his earlier words.
A faith that endures disappointment and unanswered prayer.
And yet, it seems that the message this movie conveys is that even for a man of the cloth, it does take a miracle or an answer to a prayer every now and then to keep faith alive. And if you look at it that way, it's not surprising that those people who tend to be able to weather life's storms more easily seem to be those who can recognize the miracles all around them in everyday life and appreciate them for what they are. Just the practice of appreciating the miracle of birdsong, or of a huge tree growing out of a tiny seed, or a human being reaching out to help a complete stranger. Appreciation for those little everyday miracles can change our outlook on life in profound ways. And I don't know about you, but I think for me, that magical feeling we get at Christmas time, which comes probably not by accident in the darkest days of winter, that magical feeling is just the impulse we need to keep us going even in the days of our darkest despair. That's probably why I love Christmas so much. It brings the light to the darkness. Now, let's move on to the last and best of our angel movies, Noel from 2004, starring Susan Sarandon, Penelope Cruz, Ellen Arkin, Robin Williams, and Paul Walker. This movie has 3 stories running in parallel, but only 2 of them use magical realism. And the angels in these stories are mostly symbolic, but no less real because of it. The first story revolves around a young couple, Nina and Mike, who are going through a rough patch on Christmas Eve because of Mike's extreme jealousy.
Deck the halls with Hey, you must be Mike. Surprise.
This guy's my friend! He was helping me to prepare a surprise for you! He's a tree decorator!
And the smashing of the angel from the top of the tree is very symbolic because this incident starts Nina rethinking her relationship with Mike.
I mean, we're supposed to get married in 1 week. This is it. This is forever. And I can't live like this. But I can't picture my life without him either.
And just in time to help out with this situation, Mike's angel shows up in the very dubious form of a stranger who seems to be fixated on him in a way that is less than welcome.
Oh, hi.
Hi. Yeah, just coffee. I'm in a bit of a hurry.
You know the guy?
I never laid eyes on him before.
I got you almond butter cookies.
Almond butter cookies. Those are my favorite.
I know. I get off at 9. Can we get together? I mean, it's been so long.
I mean, I don't know you.
Later that night, the stranger, whose name is Artie, shows up on Mike's doorstep, and this is where things get really weird.
I was married once to a woman that I really loved, and that woman was you.
Yep, you heard that right. He thinks that Mike is his dead wife reincarnated. Mike, of course, thinks he's crazy, but during a confrontation, Artie suffers a heart attack. And his story must have touched Mike in some way because he goes to the hospital with Artie. Then, Mike's partner digs up some dirt on Artie that eerily parallels Mike's own story.
Did you know your friend here served 4 years on a 10-year sentence for manslaughter? Comes home, finds his wife with another guy, right? But just an old friend. He throws the guy down a flight of stairs. Died in the hospital a few hours later. The wife takes off. She's doing like about 80, and hits an oncoming car head-on. She was killed instantly.
When Artie's son visits him in the hospital, he fills in a few details of Artie's story.
Do you know he still keeps that glass angel by his bed? I swear he sees her face in it. Yeah, my mother had it blow on a glass to put on top of the tree. It was a surprise for Pop.
Artie's story gives Mike an almost Scrooge-like foreshadowing of how things could pan out if he doesn't change his ways. His life history is a mirror for Mike, who is finally able to see himself in a glass darkly. And the son offers an explanation for Artie's delusion.
All my father's looking for is a little forgiveness. He screwed up and he's sorry. He just never got a chance to tell her.
So, when Artie comes to, Mike gives him the gift of a lifetime.
Artie, listen to me. I want you to know something. I forgive you. I forgive you for everything.
And Mike does learn to let go of his jealousy.
Look, if you don't want to get married, it's fine. Well, I'll just have to accept that because you're more important to me than us. Whatever you decide, be happy.
So Mike and Artie both act as angels for each other, as people so often do in real life. And there the story ends with this special gift.
I thought I'd come by, give you your gift. Merry Christmas, Mike.
Now let's move on to Rose's story. Rose is a middle-aged woman who has a lot on her plate this Christmas, as well as a past that haunts her. From Rose's co-worker, we learn that she's led a life of self-sacrifice.
You've been looking after your mother for nearly 10 years now, right? Before that, you were looking after your father and also your husband, who walked out on you the day your mother came to live with you. It's time that you stop taking care of everybody else and start thinking about yourself.
Her Christmas Eve starts with a date from hell.
Hey, I just thought we could have a good time.
No. It's not you, it's me.
You're right, Rose, it is you.
Then she visits with her mother, who suffers from dementia and seems to be approaching the end of life.
Tomorrow's Christmas, and that means that we get to spend the whole day together. Look what I found, an angel for your wreath.
After that, she accidentally crashes Nina's family Christmas party.
Tell your family I'm so sorry.
Sorry for what?
For crashing your Christmas dinner, for trespass.
Please come back inside, we'll make room.
And then she enters a Why I Hate Christmas contest at a bar.
Okay, I got pregnant the summer that I turned 25. Olivia May was born and died on Christmas.
And finally, she goes back to visit her mother again.
If she doesn't eat something tonight, we're going to have to insert a feeding tube.
She's going to eat tonight because we've got big plans, don't we, Mother and I?
Just a little nibble, please. Come on.
What the hell's wrong with this thing? Damn it!
But even with everything she's going through, she's able to show some compassion to the patient in the room across the hall from her mother, a patient who's never received a visitor, until now.
Hello.
Oh, hi. I didn't realize anybody else was here. I just thought maybe I'd cheer things up a little bit. You know, I felt bad because he never gets any visitors. It's an angel.
Thank you. That's very kind.
And this is where Rose's Christmas miracle really begins. Later that night, just as she's about to end her life, the same man shows up.
Can't swim. Love to learn.
You're the guy from the hospital.
Yeah, Charlie Boyd. You're the angel lady.
Just want you to leave me alone.
Can't do that. I see a woman standing alone on a pier looking over a ledge. I gotta help.
And then, perhaps to gain her confidence, he reveals something about himself.
I'm a priest.
Really?
Yeah, for 20 years. And last year, I left the priesthood, kicked to heaven.
They end up at her place, and one thing leads to the other. No, it's not what you think.
What do you want most in the whole world, Rose?
I guess just to make it through the night would be nice.
I can definitely help with that. Did I just invite myself to spend the night?
And when she turns his question back on him, his answer is surprisingly similar.
Yeah, on condition that you tell me what it is that you want.
That's fair. I don't want to be alone when I die.
These are two people who really need each other. And in the morning, Charlie gives Rose a very special gift, the gift of letting her know how she's touched his life.
You've touched other people's lives in ways you don't even realize.
How do you know that?
Because you touched my life. You saved me, Rose.
And here we get to a revelation that's similar to what George Bailey learned in It's a Wonderful Life, that our actions impact the lives of others in ways we can never imagine. He tells her how he'd lost his faith in God.
I was wondering where God was, and then the next thing you know, there you are, the bedside of a complete stranger telling him you love him. With such meaning. And then I knew God was there in that room with you.
But then Charlie makes another revelation that Rose is not ready to hear.
Your mother wants you to live your life, Rose. She told me to tell you.
That's not funny.
She spoke to me last night.
Watching my mother die bit by bit. So don't you tell me about my mother. Get out of here. Just go.
I love you, Rose.
But she has a change of heart later on and goes looking for Charlie at the hospital.
Excuse me, nurse, have you seen the gentleman that visits this patient? His friend's name is Charlie Boyd. You're mistaken, ma'am. This is Charles Boyd, and no one has ever come to see him. It's okay.
And so you see, Charlie was telling the truth when he said that Rose's mother talked to him. They were communicating soul to soul on the astral plane or wherever souls go to communicate with each other. So, who were the angels in this story? By now, I'm sure it's obvious to you that they were Rose and Charlie. First, Rose, in that simple act of loving compassion, where she gave that angel ornament to a complete stranger and spoke those words that we all need to hear. She gave him back his faith and let him know that he was loved. And what greater gift is there? And in the end, she gave him his Christmas wish. He was not alone when he died. And then Charlie. First, he literally saves Rose's life at her moment of greatest despair and gives her the gift of a listening ear and maybe even a shoulder to cry on. What it all boils down to is the gift of human connection, which is what she is so desperately in need of. She couldn't find that on her date. She couldn't find it with her mother. She was so alone until Charlie came along. And then he gives her the gift of letting her know that it's okay to start living again, that she doesn't have to keep sacrificing, that her mother wants her to live. It's not until she sees Charlie in the hospital that she believes it, but then she really does take it to heart. And she's rewarded in the end with a very different kind of dinner date than the one she had on Christmas Eve, one that holds a bit more promise.
So, Helen, do you think your daughter would go out to dinner with me? You know, I was hoping you might put in a good word for me. What do you think?
As we've seen, angels can appear in many different forms. In the 2011 movie Lost Christmas, we're never really sure if we're dealing with an angel or a ghost, but either way, the results are nothing short of miraculous. For a look at this and other Christmas ghost stories, click here for part 2. And Merry Christmas!